Okay, so welcome. This is our second conversation about empaths, connected with the Empowering Empaths in Life and Business group. And this evening we have Charlotte Noon, and Charlotte's a teacher and a coach and a highly sensitive person herself with two highly sensitive children. And our conversation this evening is going to be about how we can support our highly sensitive teenagers, particularly children, teenagers, Charlotte, and help them to thrive. And when I was posting today, I remembered myself how challenging I found school as a sensitive person. I was so relieved when I was 16 and I could go to sixth form college. And I think when you look back, you realise how difficult school can be, can't you? For anyone, but particularly as a sensitive person. So welcome, Charlotte. Over to you. Tell us a bit about you and your story and what's brought you to doing what you do now.
Thank you, Rosemary. So I don't massively love just talking for ages and having the spotlight on me. So I'd love to make this interactive. So please do feel free to put questions in the chat, to make comments, etc., because that will really prompt me and I'd be really grateful. Thank you. So I'm going to chat for a bit about my background and my story about being highly sensitive, having highly sensitive children, and also the teenagers as well, that I work with a lot of highly sensitive teenagers. And then I'll be sharing a few tips that have worked for us. But also I'd just love to open it up for discussion and questions, and for you all to share your wisdom as well would be fantastic. So please do interact in the chat, and I will not be talking for ages, I promise. So, excuse me, sorry. So, bit about me, that I was very sensitive when I was a child. I was labelled as shy. I was always told by my teachers, oh, you need to speak up more, you need to be louder, you need to be less sensitive. And I developed this belief quite early on that I was somebody who needed fixing. And really that was a belief I think that I took into adulthood, and it's only quite recently that I've learned to embrace it really as being something positive. So I kind of got into the habit quite early on in life of just pushing through, really doing what everybody expected, trying to be what I felt everybody else expected me to be. And I remember I often felt overwhelmed. I often felt quite tired. I had a lot of stomach aches, a lot of allergies, I had asthma. And I remember finding childhood pretty difficult, but then I got quite used to actually just pushing through, masking it, as you do, doing what you think people expect of you. And then in my late 20s, I developed ME. And for anyone who knows me, I have a lot of energy. I generally speaking have a lot of energy. And so that was a really difficult time for me. I ended up leaving my job. And it's only quite recently that I've been doing a lot of work on the mind-body connection. It was just something I'd not been particularly aware of. And I kind of now understand why that happened. That constant pushing through, not listening to yourself, doing what everybody else wants you to do. And then eventually the body says no. And I do believe that that's what happened to me. And shortly after that time, I had my children, and both of them are highly sensitive as well. And I began to notice them with the same patterns as me from quite early on. So my eldest was very young for her year. I think she was the youngest in her year. Became quite withdrawn in the school environment quite quickly. She didn't like it. She had a lot of stomach aches, a lot of basically following all the same patterns that I'd had. And then we moved, and for a long time we didn't want to unsettle them, so we kept them at the same school that they were at, and we for a really long time, even though it was quite a long commute, because we were afraid of rocking the boat for them. And I remember everyone saying, oh, they're kids, they're resilient, they'll be fine, they'll bounce back. And we did move them in the end because it needed to happen. It was so far away from where we were living. But actually they weren't fine at all, and they were desperately unhappy. And then we decided something had to give, And quite suddenly, we just decided we were going to give home education a go. It was meant to be temporary. It was certainly not something we'd planned to do for as long as we did. And we actually ended up doing it for 4.5 years, because once we had taken them out and just let them be, and we were working to our own rhythms, so they were no longer being tested, they were no longer under time constraints, they had a lot of time to follow their own interests, to follow their own pace, and really to socialize as well, only as much as they wanted to socialize. And I think the irony is, for all of us, me included, is that actually that was a period in my life where I probably socialized more than I ever had done, because I think that when you don't feel pressured to do it and you're doing it at your own pace, it's actually a whole lot easier to do it. So we did that for a long time. Like I said, 4.5 years, until they both went to secondary school, where they're now at, and they thrived. And actually they are now, is the right decision for us for them to be back in the system for secondary school, but they are actually still thriving. And I think it's because we very much at home kept that home ed ethos. So we're constantly still feeding them the same messages that we fed them when they were home educated, and trying to keep our home environment that way, whatever is going on at school. And I'm not saying it's easy. Neither of them, I think, find that environment particularly easy, but we have found a way to make it work. And actually, it's interesting that a lot of what my children say is very similar to the things that for those who don't know me, I'm a coach of teens, and also an English tutor. So my background is in school teaching. I taught English at secondary school for a long time. I left the system, for the past, well, it must be 8 years now, I've been doing one-to-one tuition of English. And through that time, I've found there's been a pattern that I have attracted quite a lot of clients to me who are very similar to how I was as a child, so quite highly sensitive. I learned that what was going on for a lot of them didn't have a whole lot to do with English or their ability in English at all, but had to do with how they felt about themselves, their self-esteem, their beliefs about themselves, and just what they were capable of. So I then trained as a coach. I use a lot of NLP in what I do. And most of what I do, if I'm honest, is looking at those underlying beliefs that they formed at a really young age, because most of our core beliefs are formed before the age of 7, and getting them to relook at them and see them as beliefs rather than facts about themselves, and basically get them to see how awesome they actually are, because they're brilliant. A lot of them come to me thinking that they need fixing, as I did when I was a child. And a lot of the work I do is around making them see that actually they've been given this incredible gift, and how they can show up in the world as themselves, and what an amazing difference that is actually going to make. So just to run through, I thought I would sort of highlight the top 5 things that tend to come up when I'm working with young people. Oh, hi, Emma. Emma's just arrived. Yeah, the top 5 things that tends to come up in my conversation with teens in terms of what they specifically find difficult at school. So a lot of them talk about sensory stuff. So noise being a big one. A lot of them are quite sensitive to noise, particularly the busyness in the corridors. So lesson changeover can be quite a chaotic time. And I think for teens who are highly sensitive, it's less than easy for them to be bashed against walls and hit with school bags and things that perhaps other children might take in their stride. For highly sensitive kids can be a real struggle. A lot of them talk about how threatened they feel by disruptive behaviour that goes on at school, even if it's absolutely nothing to do with them. That it still has quite a profound effect on them just to actually be in the room while it's happening, that uncertainty of what's going to happen next. And of course, a lot of them will be empaths, and therefore perhaps taking on the feelings of the teacher, the feelings of the other kids, the feelings of the student who's being disruptive as well. But also, interestingly, what I've found more recently is that for some kids, it's not the loud volume that's the problem. Some of them will actually have issues with quiet voices or certain pitch of voices or certain sounds that will get right under their skin to the point where it's quite uncomfortable for them to be in the room. Similarly, in terms of sensory, school uniform, loads of them talk about just how uncomfortable they feel wearing the uniform. So last week there was a heat wave, and a lot of the students, it was really funny, even my kids were so excited because they'd been told that they didn't have to wear their blazers, and to be able to take their blazers off and not have to wear them, so they were so much more comfortable, was quite a big exciting thing for them. So, but I think for some of them, genuinely labels and anything that might be a bit scratchy can be really quite distracting for them. Second thing that comes up massively is performance under pressure. So many of them talk about if there's a timer on, they will just crumble. And that's so common. I would say that's more of the teams that I teach than isn't, basically. And I think it's quite unfortunate as well, perhaps some of the language that's developed around that, in that some of the some schools seem to have adopted PUPs as a name for exams, and it actually stands for performance under pressure. And of course, having that kind of language embeds that neurology of it being pressure. And for some of them, that's a real difficulty. Another massive one, being singled out for any reason at all. So a lot of them say that they spend all day being quite worried about being picked to read aloud is a big one. Drama performances, being picked on to answer questions. Another big one as well is just constantly being around people all day. Some of them talked about how difficult they find it to not have anywhere to go where they can just be quiet, that for the whole, however long they're there, 6-7 hours a day, they're around people. And as sensitive people, I know for me, I need to have some space where I'm not around people in order to decompress. And in the school environment, that's not always possible. So what's happening is that a lot of them are going home at the end of the day and actually feeling really, really quite stressed and quite overwhelmed just from having been around people all day. And then the fear of being told off. So many of them talk about that fear of being told off. And often it's those kids who are going out of their way not to do anything wrong. So it's those who might be a bit forgetful, they've forgotten their PE kit, they've forgotten their homework, they've not done something that wasn't put on the homework system, etc., etc., and how really upsetting that is for them. And then a lot of them will talk about how they're then upset about getting upset because other kids are perhaps saying, well, you know, it's not anything, what you're worried about, this isn't a big deal. And for them, it's a really big deal. And then they're worried about the fact that they're upset about being worried. So those are the top 5 things really that seems to come up with the sensitive kids. And when I was looking over it, interestingly, I realized what a massive deal all of those things had been for me when I was a teen, but actually I wasn't consciously aware of how much it was affecting me. And I think that might be the case for quite a few of them, that they know that they don't feel great, they know they're finding it hard, but haven't necessarily identified why they're finding it difficult. And sometimes just that knowledge of what it is that they're sensitive to and having a few strategies to manage that can make a world of difference to them. Some of the things that come up, some sensitive kids tend to have a really big sense of justice. And so for some of them, where there are moving goalposts, or they feel that there's moving goalposts, that they've been told one thing and then something else happens, or there's class detentions, or something where everybody's lumped together and they feel they're being blamed for something they haven't done. I think for sensitive kids, that can be a real tough one. And also picking up on other people's moods. Now, a lot of what I will say to them, and actually, Rosemary, I think you were the first person who ever said this to me when I was going through a tough time. You said how much of that you're feeling belongs to you. And I realized actually so much of it didn't. It was about 70% of it that was everybody else's energy. And actually having that conversation with teens about how much of it actually belongs to them, that negative energy that they're feeling, because so often as an empath, they're picking it up from their friends, they're picking it up from their teachers, they're picking it up from their parents, they're picking it up all day long and carrying it around. And so often, actually, they can give quite a lot of that back just by being aware that it doesn't belong to them. A thing that I'm probably struggling with a little bit at the moment, I must admit, is that for some of the teens that I'm working with, the sensitivity that they're feeling is in some cases being treated as a discipline issue. And I think that can be quite dangerous, if I'm honest. I think that I personally believe that behind every behaviour is a positive intention. So I think if a child is needing to leave the room, if a child is constantly feeling sick, if a child is even playing up and perhaps being disruptive, then underneath that, there will be an underlying reason. And I see sometimes how something escalates and escalates and escalates and escalates. So it starts off as quite a mild anxiety and then can blow up out of all proportion once they're being disciplined because they're not staying in, disciplined because they're missing school, disciplined because they're constantly going to the office saying they feel sick. And it just gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. So I've seen that be a bit of an issue as well recently. But those are the main things that have come up, and I'd be interested as well in a bit for you to share anything as well that you've come across with your kids or at work or in any other context. But I thought what I'd do first of all is just share some of what has worked for us as a family and what sometimes works as well with some of my clients. And you know, what works for one won't necessarily work for everyone, but if you can take anything useful from this, then please do. So I'd say the first thing is that certainly we've started to view physical symptoms differently as more of a message that if you're feeling something, then it's because your body is giving you a message. And rather than look at the symptoms, we started to look at the cause. And certainly I have found that an absolute game changer for me, an absolute game changer. If I know when I'm stressed because I will get symptoms, and I had never before, literally not until the last 18 months, seen that connection. And just understanding that has been huge. And then, of course, because I understand that about myself, I can now be much more understanding about my children when they have similar things. But yeah, I think it's, for us, we try not to just plow on. I always felt that I had to. At school, at work, it was always, well, you've just got to get on with it. That's life. You know, everybody gets cold, everybody gets this, everybody gets that. And I think the more you plow on, particularly if you're hypersensitive, the more likely you are for the symptoms to get worse and worse and worse. And I think sometimes it's just about taking a step back, breathing, recognizing what's going on, and then being able to start up again. Another thing that I have found as well with my own children is that they need a lot of time on their own, both of them. They really enjoy that. And I think perhaps at times I've worried that, you know, do they spend too much time on their own? Should they be doing this? Should they be doing that? Should they be going to all these clubs? Should I be encouraging them to do loads more? We probably have gone through cycles of that in the past. But actually, I tend to just let them do what they want now when they're at home. If they need to have loads of time to unplug and to do their own thing and to recharge, actually, I noticed that when they've had it, they're far more resourceful than to be able to do the things such as going to school and all of those things. Also, allowing them to say no. That's been a big thing for me, because sometimes it can be less than easy when they suddenly decide that they don't want to do something and you've got to explain that away. And actually, the older they get, the more I'm giving them those choices. Because I think if I can teach them at a young age what I didn't learn, hopefully I'll be able to steer them away from some of what I ended up having to learn in adulthood. I think as well, it's being able to feel big feelings and to be able to label them, to be able to identify them and know what they are and talk about them. And I think anger is a big one. I think certainly that's something that I have historically not really, I've suppressed that, because I think I was always under the belief that good girls don't get angry, good girls don't throw tantrums, and consequently pushed it down and suppressed it. And I think actually sometimes it's important to have big emotions and to be able to verbalize them and to be able to express them in a safe place. And I know some people have said to me that their kids will get home from school and have huge meltdowns, and that is quite common for that to happen at home, I think, because it's a safe space in which they're then able to, they feel comfortable to express those emotions. And I think that's a great thing. If they feel happy at home to express that, I think that's a really positive thing. Another thing as well, as I mentioned before, is around language. I think avoiding, well, certainly I absolutely do this when I'm teaching, is avoiding words like stress, anxiety, difficult. I will go out of my way to avoid those words, because it instantly, our minds, our brains only pick up on the key words. So they hear difficult or stressed or anxious, and that neural pathway starts firing and those feelings come up. So very much now when I'm talking to my students, I will say things like, oh, it might seem less than easy. And then that key word is easy. And I'll try and use words like calm and slowly and relaxed, rather than using those words that they're so used to using, particularly as well using a pronoun before it. I hear no end of people, teenagers, saying my anxiety and owning that anxiety, rather than labeling it as an emotion that everybody feels. Yeah, I think the other big thing as well is, and I know I've been guilty of this, is around labeling, and I've become much more conscious of it since probably since I've been seeing clients for coaching. That is quite interesting how many of them will come in and say, I am shy, and they will label themselves as shy. And of course, as soon as you say I am something, that's the highest level, the identity level, that is what I am. And it becomes such a strong belief that they feel like they can't change it. And of course, unfortunately, what tends to happen is it gets said, And then it gets said again and again and again and again, and it's, oh yeah, that person's shy, that person's really shy, that person's shy. And then it can be quite challenging sometimes for them to be able to not live up to that. And so a lot of the work that I do with teenagers is around re-examining those beliefs and looking at some of the traits that they might believe to come under the label of shyness, and how positive they are and what they value about having those traits and what that means for the people around them, and reframe what it means to be shy, reframe what it means to be sensitive, but also to get them to acknowledge that that is a belief and can be changed at any time. Oh, I feel like I've talked for ages. Does anybody have any comments or anything that they'd like to share or ask? Feel free just to unmute or tap in the chat. Oh, thank you, Chiara.
I can recognise all of those in myself. Everything you said, that singled out, fear of being told off, fear of other people being told off. I hated school. I was so relieved when I left at 16. It was so bloody stressful every day, and that was at the time of corporal punishment as well, and I used to feel other people's pain, and they didn't give a two-darn, but I did. And it was hearing back on it, hearing people who I was at school with 50 odd years ago just brushing things off, whereas for me it was the biggest thing ever.
Yeah. And I think there can be a lot of shame around that as well. Certainly I've been told I overreact on no end of occasions to things, and actually it's not massively helpful if you feel it very deeply. You know, there's a lot of people do, don't they feel things quite deeply, and I think that actually can be quite a positive thing as well, because it gives you so much empathy with how other people are feeling. I certainly noticed that with a lot of the students that I work with who are sensitive. They pick up on really really subtle things and will be quite concerned about them, and making sure everybody's okay and knowing what to say and what not to say. Those are huge strengths, I think, to take into adulthood.
Yes, and I just share quickly. I said to Charlotte earlier, I'm running a money course for 14, 16 women on it, and I did it first in 2020, and just seeing 16 faces on the screen on a Zoom and reading everyone's body language was completely overwhelming, to the point where I haven't done one for probably about a year. And I've just run one again, because I now understand what I was doing. I've withdrawn, and once you understand that you're feeling everybody's feelings and you're almost anticipating for them, and now I know that if someone's got a sort of a really pensive face, it doesn't necessarily mean that they don't like what they're hearing or they're worried. They're just going through their process. And but not knowing those things is, oh my goodness, I used to get off the call absolutely exhausted, and running meetings as well. So all of this, I certainly relate to it. It's interesting you said about that, how much of it belonged to me. And then you can, thank you for reminding me of that. I haven't thought about that for a while. And if you realise that only 30%, I mean, what seems to come up for me, I feel a feeling, and it's, oh, and this used to happen in lockdown a lot, big feeling of fear. And I think, wow, where did that come from? Something hit me in the solar plexus, and it would be, how much of that is mine? And it was about 30%. And then you can almost literally take the other 70, wrap it up, and throw it out the window. Give it back, it's not mine. And you can do that with people as well, can't you? You can, visualize them in front of you and just give it back. That's your crap. I don't need that. It's not mine to take on. Thank you for reminding me that. That's really powerful. Yeah.
I think that's it. I mean, if you taught that to a teen, certainly I wish that I had been taught that, you know, when I was so much younger, because if you're not aware that actually you're carrying around all this stuff that doesn't belong to you, you feel it as your own, don't you? And just to have that skill to be able to say, okay, that's not mine, and focus on, and this is another big thing that I do in the work that I do, is focusing on what the teenagers is in their control, you know, what is in their influence to change. And sometimes what we do is draw around their hand and write everything inside that is in their influence, and everything around the outside that isn't, because actually there's no point focusing on that stuff that's outside of your control, because it's only the stuff in the inside really that you can alter. And then when we put all of our energy into looking at those things that you can influence, that's when the big changes happen.
Yeah. Anyone else got any comments to add, please?
Thinking if there's anything else I was gonna.
I don't know if everyone's putting their kids to bed.
Yeah, well, I mean, just to finish off, really, you know, in the spirit of celebration, to finish it off in an upbeat way, I've come up with a few things that I think are real strengths of sensitive teens, certainly that I've seen in my own kids and that I've seen in other sensitive kids that I've worked with. And, you know, I'd love to hear if anybody's got any others as well, particularly fantastic traits of sensitive kids. So I've got creativity. I find often that kids who are sensitive tend to turn their energy inwards rather than outwards, and that makes them super creative. So often they'll be daydreaming, but while they're daydreaming, they're coming up with all this amazing stuff that, you know, obviously we need creativity in the world. Also, they tend to have amazing friends as well. So what I notice a lot with the students that I work with is that there's a big focus on popularity. And I've even heard parents talk about it as well, in terms of the hierarchy of whether or not the child is popular and where they sit in that hierarchy. And, you know, extroverts are often celebrated. The world is set up for extroverts often. And what I've noticed is that whilst kids will say to me, oh, I don't think I'm very popular, actually, when you really talk to them, what you find is that they have a couple of really deep connections with a select few people, really meaningful friendships, which I think is very positive. They often have, as we've discussed, incredible powers of observation. So whilst they might not be speaking, they'll be watching and they'll be listening and they'll be analysing, and often because of that, they will see things that other people don't see. And when you think about them getting older and going into the workplace, they're such valuable traits. Some of them have an incredible ability to hyperfocus, sensitive children, because they will pick something and give it their everything. And often you find that they produce such incredible work because they've paid such close attention to it. They often make really calculated and measured decisions. And often as parents, what we worry about is peer pressure. And are they going to succumb to peer pressure? Are they going to do things just because everybody else is doing it? And what I found is that often they're less likely to, because they are watching and they're thinking and they're analysing and they're making very measured decisions. And I think all of that is stuff to be celebrated. So yeah, if you take anything from this, I would hope it would be that being a sensitive teen is an absolutely awesome thing. Anybody got any other strengths or comments or anything else to add at all?
Something I've noticed is with that sensitivity, a bit like when you don't know what you're doing, it can be quite overwhelming. But when you do, it is a strength, because I had 14 women on a call last night, and I was able to, from a place pull back, knowing myself and very much in my core, was to tune into everyone and to hold the balance in a group, and to help them really gently, supportively associate with each other. I think that's a huge strength of sensitive people, and also that ability to connect deeply quite quickly. I always used to look at the spectrum, which was explained to me, Nita Murjani's book, that you've got like a bell curve. And on this end, you've got the empaths, about 20–30% of us. And on this end, at the other extreme, you've got the Donald Trumps. And they just genuinely don't care at all. Everything just washes over. But the world needs more empaths. And in the middle, there's the sheeples, the people who are looking for someone to follow. And this is partly why we started the empath group, is because people need more gentle, supportive, kind, loving, heart-centered leadership, don't they? And so, and this is why Winning Women exists as well, isn't it? To allow people to feel safe enough to really follow their heart and to speak about what we're doing and to share. And you're doing an amazing job with the teens, but we're all just big kids at the end of the day, aren't we? So, yeah, that's who we are. So Chiara, I feel like you've just described my daughters and me. Lovely. Oh my goodness, 3 of you, is that? Wow, houseful. And do you think there are certain careers that are really suited to sensitive people, Charlotte, from your observations, that you see the young people going in certain directions?
I think, to be honest, like, where in the world do we not need empaths? I think in some ways it's not helpful to have them just doing certain careers, because really I think there is a place for sensitive, empathetic people in all. I think all industries would benefit from that. Definitely. From that kind of energy.
Yeah. And it was explained to me when I was studying Australian flower essences back in the 90s, that everyone who's been born since 2000 has got at least 1 2 in their birth chart. And if you look up the numerology of the 2, it's all about sensitivity and empath, and which is why these kids that have been born now, they're quite different, aren't they? Which is why we need people like you to give that support. Well, we always did, didn't we? And it was just completely lacking in the education system, and it often still is, isn't it? And now we've got these kids on. I was looking at today's date, it's the 22nd of the 6th, 2022. And the energy of the 2 is really, really soft, and it's all about empathy. So there's a whole generation of young people who are expressing much more of these traits apparently than ever were before.
That can only be positive.
Yeah, as long as we help them feel safe to be who they are. And, yes. And then the way Anita Murjani presented it was the 20, what we have here is our 20%, but there's this much bigger subtle self about the other 80%. And when we're really in our strength is when we're in that lovely quiet place and tapping into that intuition and daydreaming and living in that heart energy and trusting ourselves in a way that we haven't been taught to do. Yeah. And education for years has been looking out the window. No, come on, get your nose down on the grindstone, stop daydreaming. Whereas I think we recognise now that the power is in the daydream.
Yeah. Oh, 100%. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And it's giving them the space, isn't it, to daydream, really. And life is incredibly fast-paced, not just in the education system, but I think everywhere. It's quite hard for anybody to take that time out to to just daydream and to, you know, just be. Really, we're all so busy doing, aren't we? And I think if we can teach, you know, young people to just take that step back and breathe, what a favor we'll be doing them in the long run.
Wow. Also, how do you feel about people getting out in nature as well? But something I've felt very, very important with empaths is to really have some grounding practices, to have our bare feet on the ground, or visualize ourselves being really connected with the earth, these kind of practices.
Oh, 100%. I mean, that's something that's massively important to me. I mean, I'm at the moment, I've got a lot of screen work to do, and I'm literally, I will do it for 30 minutes and then outside, and then for 30 minutes and outside, because I need that in order to reconnect. And I've actually been using that model a little bit with my daughter as well when she was doing her revision, that we played around with a few things that actually worked brilliantly, to the point where I'm thinking, where else can I roll this out? We sat down and would read something for 20 minutes, and then we would go for a power walk, and she would just tell me everything she'd remembered. So we'd be out actually in the woods, and the stuff she remembered was incredible, just because we were outside, she was moving, it was different. It wasn't that whole, oh, I'm sat down and I'm so bored and I'm so over it. It was, you know, the moving around, the nature, all of that is so important, I think, for keeping our brains ticking over. And it really made me think how many others of my students would really benefit from that.
Lovely. And I'm thinking that would be a great thing to share, even on somewhere like LinkedIn. You know, so many people are challenged with this, and we've been taught that you have to sit there and have your nose down for this many hours, and then if you're lucky you get half an hour lunch break, and then school breaks have got so much smaller, haven't they? We used to be an hour and a quarter when I was at school. We used to be able to go home.
Yeah, some of them are down to 40 minutes, I think, now.
Yeah, I think some of them are even less than that, and even less for the teachers as well, isn't it? There's this, and in work, that eating at your desk thing, and I think lockdown's been good for that in a way of. I know for me, I'm much more likely to actually cook for myself in the middle of the day now. Cook something really healthy, and then I'm single anyway, so I may want to carry on working into the evening. But you're right, when you spoke about your kids in the early, it was when you said about getting into their rhythm, wasn't it? Finding their own pace and their rhythm, and yeah.
And everyone does learn at their own pace, and everybody works at their own pace. And I think for some kids, if they could just slow down, you know, if they were just given that space to slow down and do it at their own pace, how much more they would be able to achieve.
Yeah, please share about your daughter though. That would be amazing. You know, about that revision and that sort of thing. Interesting. One of my cousin's got a son they found he's autistic, and she said they'll go for a walk and he has to talk and talk and talk and talk just to get things out of himself. And then after that he's calm, but he needs to verbally express. So maybe there's something in that as well, not necessarily for everyone, but for some.
Yes, that's interesting, actually. You should say that, because with certainly quite a few of the students that I've been working with, some of them have a real sort of anxiety about getting it out on paper. And then if we do it verbally, so with those, I will always do it verbally first. Some of them understand so much, and they can infer so much from what they're saying, but it's the confidence of putting it down on the paper that's holding them back. So it's also looking at ways in which that talent and that knowledge can be expressed in a different way. Even through drawing as well. Somebody was saying the other day, I can't remember who it was now, but I was talking to somebody the other day who was saying that they did everything through drawings and were able to express. I think it was somebody, it was a marketing thing, I think, where somebody on Twitter was only expressing themselves through cartoons and had this huge following. But the whole thing was done just through drawing. And I think, oh, I wonder how much knowledge students would be able to articulate if they were able to do it in their own way.
Fascinating, fascinating. So we've got Sandra, Deborah, Chiara, and Emma. Ladies, anything you'd like to just share in the last few minutes? If you don't want to, feel free, but if you just want to unmute yourself, please do. If not, we will wind up. Oh, lovely. Good. Good. That's wonderful. Thank you, Chiara. Obviously got what you came here for. If you're not already in the empath group, please come and join. And I am asking people to give me an email address, because I will email out about these events and other things that we've got going on. I'm a coach, and my work is very specifically now for sensitive people as well. So there are different events that are going on that are specifically for people like us, or to help us, and we don't always respond to other ways of working or being talked to, do we? Yeah. Yeah, so if you want to drop me an email address, and yeah, if you're not already in the empath group, it's Empowered Empaths in Life and Business. You found your way here. Lovely. Okay, Charlotte, thank you so much. That's been absolutely amazing. I've got loads of notes. I will share this in the email and in the groups. Feel free, Charlotte. I'll send you a YouTube recording, so share it on your social media, on your website, anywhere you want. This was so valuable.
Yeah, we'll do. And if anybody's got any individual questions as well, I'm always, just contact me. I'm always happy to chat.
Oh, do you want to just give us your details, please? Your website, your email?
Yeah, sure. I'll put that.
Maybe just say it as well, because not everyone's got a pen here.
Yep. So my email is info@charlottenooncoaching.co.uk.
Lovely.
And my website is charlottenooncoaching.co.uk.
Lovely. And I'll
pop it in the chat. And actually, I've got some links here actually that I could share in the chat, because I realised when I was working out what I wanted to say tonight, that I've written a lot of blogs on this stuff. So I could actually put some links to the blogs as well. A lot of what I've said is in those. I'll pop a couple of links in because I've got them up now. So,
well, feel free to put them in the empath group, and also in Winning Women on Blogging Tuesday.
Yes.
And I would seriously suggest you share them somewhere like LinkedIn too, and get them to a wider audience. This is so important.
Yeah, I will do.
Yeah. Absolutely. And what about if somebody wanted to work with you, or maybe their child was interested in doing something?
Yeah, absolutely. So I offer a 30-minute discovery call, basically. I mean, what I do, I'll be honest, is I start everything with a discovery call, because what I've found over the past couple of years is that everybody needs something completely different. The teams are so unique, and I've started trying to put it into packages. This is what I do, this is how it works. And I found that by far the best results I get is when I chat with the parents and I chat with the team, and I give them precisely what they need in their own package. So I'm entirely flexible, perfectly happy to have a chat with anybody, and we can work out what it is that they best need. So what I do sometimes is I'll work maybe for sort of 4 hourly sessions with a team, and then they decide actually they don't need me anymore. But in order to keep that link, sometimes what we'll do is we'll set up a series of like 20-minute sessions or 15-minute sessions online, just for accountability and troubleshooting and anything else that might happen in the long term. And then sometimes they come back and they have more sessions again. Sometimes they don't need them and they go off and do their own thing. Sometimes I do a combination of English tuition with confidence coaching. That's quite common. But yeah, basically I will always tailor it to the individual. So best place to start is just to give me a call. Or you can book a discovery call on my website as well.
Perfect. Lovely. Charlotte, thank you so much. Ladies, thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Everyone.
And just to say, we have a couple of events coming up with the Empath group. One's talking to a lady called Natty, who's which is talking about, she's a lady with breast cancer, and we're looking at the illness process as a highly sensitive person and the learning she's had from that and how she helps her clients. And then we've got a lovely lady called Linda Barber, who's talking about the subject of narcissism, which is often something that's connected with empaths. Okay, and I'll be sharing those in the next couple of days. Lovely. Okay, I'm going to stop the recording. Thank you all so much for joining us.